As you probably know, Freshdesk is an online customer support software company. So, in 2009, I'd like to tell you a story that happened in 2009. So, I was moving back from the US to India, and so happened that I was shipping all my stuff back to Chennai, and 2 months later, my stuff arrived. My TV was broken. Now, I didn't actually worry about it too much because I had purchased insurance, so I thought it should be pretty straightforward to contact customer support and get my insurance money back. So, long story short, it was like 28 email threads, multiple phone calls, submitting a ton of documentation, and 5 months of time had passed. But simply, I couldn't even know the name of the insurance company that had underwritten my insurance. So, at that point, I was actually pretty frustrated, and I didn't care about my money anymore. I just wanted revenge. So I went online to a place called R2I Club Forums, which is Return to India Club Forum. People who move back from the US to India use that forum. That's where I'd originally got the recommendation for the shipping company. So I went and actually posted my experience along with pictures of my broken TV. And surprisingly, the next day, the president of the company came and apologized, and the very next day, money was in my bank. Now, I want you to understand that as somebody who had built 4 customer support help desks, this was something new to me. What traditional channels of support like phone and email couldn't accomplish, I was able to get when I took my problem online. And then I started observing the other customers were also doing it. Like it was when I saw Twitter, like customers sharing their experiences on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. Now, customer support had moved from being a one-to-one conversation between the customer and the company to customers talking about the company on social media. And I think that was when I realized that most of the tools are still focusing on traditional channels of support like phone and email. So I thought there is possibly opportunity for somebody like me who knows the market to build a next generation customer support software. And that's why we actually called it Freshdesk, as in Fresh Help Desk, which not only helps a company listen into customer support queries via phone and email, but also through new channels like a mobile app or Twitter or Facebook or blogs and so on. Yeah, so I don't think we actually did any kind of market research. So it was based on the fundamental belief that customer support still has a huge market potential just for the simple fact of moving customer support on the cloud. Like even the traditional channels of support like email and phone call and website and chat, right? So the shift to SaaS was happening. So even the mere act of moving a traditional help desk to the cloud itself seemed like a big opportunity because there weren't many credible players at that time. And added to the belief that we saw that customer support is changing from a one-to-one conversation to customers wanting to talk to other customers and customers wanting to talk to the world. So we thought these 2 factors, like one is the adoption of SaaS and the other one is impact of social media on customer support. These 2 factors were a big enough opportunity because we believe that companies of the future would actually need the tools to be able to manage all these conversations across all these channels. So that was the belief with which we started the company. Okay, so first I'll try to give you a very simple explanation, right? If you want to say it in one line, so SaaS is all about saying, why buy the cow when all you need is milk, right? And let me explain. So like there is something interesting which students can actually read about in a book called The Big Switch by Nicholas Carr, where he actually takes the analogy of electricity. So 100 years ago, when all these big factories were being set up, all these factories used to actually run their own power plants, right? Because they needed to generate electricity in order to power the factories. But then when the power grid came, it became much cheaper and easier for the factories to focus on their core business and just buy electricity off the grid. Now that's the same analogy in SaaS. So if you are running a hospital or a bank or let's say an e-commerce company, right? Do you need to really manage all the IT yourself? Like for example, a bank needs to be focusing on banking, right? So they don't have to have a big IT department with all the servers and softwares. So, but companies used to have these IT departments because they needed the systems to be able to perform their job better. Now, that is in a nutshell what SaaS is all about, where without having to employ people in the IT department, without having to maintain all these servers and software yourself, you could just log into the browser and like how you connect to your Gmail. Like instead of having an Exchange server for your mail server and having a mail server administrator, today you and I just log in to open a browser and log into our Gmail and we see all our email. So similarly, customer support software traditionally used to be installed on servers inside a company and managed by IT administrators and server administrators. So today what we are saying with Freshdesk is you don't need all that. So you're running a TV production company, you worry about TV production. So you go to your browser, if you want customer support, you log into Freshdesk, log into your account and you will see your customer queries on the browser and you can start replying from the browser or from your mobile app. So that's what we bring to the table in terms of software as a service. So see, in 2010 when we started out, and even today to a greater extent, it's relatively hard for an Indian company to actually accept payments. You have to understand, in SaaS a customer pays monthly, right? So if I have to charge a customer monthly, it makes our job much easier and the customer's job much easier if they put the credit card on file in a secure vault and we charge the same amount every month. Like regulations in India actually force that, and it's all for a good reason, that customers have to do a two-factor authentication, which means every time I have to present you a bill and then you will have to, in addition to giving me the credit card, you have to do a password based authentication in order to approve the transaction, right? So SaaS business was fundamentally unviable in India because you can't store credit cards on file. So that was the primary driver for us to incorporate in the US. But then we see ourselves as a global company even from day one. In fact, our first customer came from Australia. When we had like say 40 customers or 70 customers, we had like 23 countries, customers from 23 countries. So we knew that we had to build leadership teams there. So we went ahead and incorporated in the US and incorporated in India as a separate company. And now India is a subsidiary of the US company. Okay, so the good news for us was we were playing in what can be called as a mature commoditized market. But we also had a product that was bringing in innovative social support features. But most customers, even today, when they come to us, they think they need an email help desk or an email ticketing system. So the advantage of playing in a commoditized mature market is that people think that they know what they want and they search on Google and other search engines, and it's easier for us to be found online. So that was how we got our initial set of customers, and even today that's our primary acquisition channel. When you go online and search for say ticketing software or a cloud-based help desk or free customer support software, so Freshdesk shows up on the list and people come to the website. We make it really easy for anybody to kind of sign up for a trial account, a 30-day trial, and we make it easy for them to set it up. So I think our initial traction and most of the traction today is coming from online acquisition. I don't remember the exact numbers per se, but let me tell you what we did in the early days, and especially I tell you the story when we won the Microsoft BizSpark award, which was a cash prize of $40,000. Conventional wisdom would have said conserve the money and maximize the runway of the company. But what I ended up doing was we spent $45,000 in 2 months. So basically what I remember doing it because I was doing it myself. So I literally tried out every experiment that we wanted to try in terms of doing Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads and Google ads and banner ads. And so basically the conversion for Google AdWords was pretty good, but it was an expensive channel. We found some niche channels which were actually giving pretty good conversion but was not scalable. Like for example, when we did say buy sell ads or banner advertising on these sites, we were able to target one segment of customers, which is the professional services companies, web design companies, graphic design companies, who all needed a customer support system. So we were able to target one segment and do it very cost effectively. So we were getting good returns, but it was not very scalable. But when we were looking at growing from zero to say 100 customers, like it was an easy way of doing it. So I think we also learned that Facebook ads, for example, at that stage when we didn't have any brand recall, so it was probably not a great source of a lead gen for us, because people, when they are on Facebook, they're not actually actively looking to buy business software. So Facebook ads didn't work for us in the early days. LinkedIn also didn't convert properly. So I remember these things in 2011 when I was actually managing these campaigns. Today we have professionals doing it. So I would say first think of what you can do without spending the marketing dollars, because it's very easy to lose a lot of money in marketing. So in fact, I'll give you an advice that I gave a company called Eventifier when I met the CEO at a very early stage. So he was having a product that allows event organizers to be, let's say, to be able to create a social feed of everybody who's talking about the event and photographs from Twitter. So he created a channel, an online channel for the event. For people who are not able to attend the event, they can actually go online and see it. So in fact, they came to me saying, okay, we have a $10,000 or a $20,000 budget. And so I had to tell them $10,000 is not a lot of money in marketing. You can just blow it away. But look at what you could do. And this is where I would say startup entrepreneurs should understand that there are lots of channels where you don't have to actually spend money. So for example, what we ended up doing was I told him to go and look at Eventbrite, where you can actually see every event that's happening in any city of the world. Pretty much you also have the organizer's email address. So I told him, okay, you have the organizer's email address. Why don't you write a personal email to them saying, can you try my product and give feedback when you're doing this event, right? So, and this doesn't cost any money. And then the other thing is, like, you will see that a lot of times people who are running events may not have an event manager title, right? There are professional event managers, but then there are others in the company. Like for example, if we are doing a 5th anniversary celebration for Freshdesk, the person who's running this event is not an event manager, it's somebody who's working for us. So I said, you have to find out who these people are and contact them on LinkedIn and try to ask for feedback. So that would be my first advice, is assume that you have zero marketing dollars. There are free PR sites where you could actually submit your press releases and actually get traction. So first exhaust all of the free options that you have before you spend money on marketing. And when it comes to spending money on marketing, I don't think there is any silver bullet answer. Like, I know that this is, if you want to ask me, if there's one question that every entrepreneur has asked me, they all want to know what is the silver bullet for customer acquisition, right? So unfortunately, there isn't any one channel, but the broader framework is you try multiple channels, but with smaller amounts of money to see if it works for you. And then if it works, you scale it. So basically nail it and then scale it, as they call it. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting story. So I think probably there was a lot of luck involved there. So I was thinking for names which had either desk in it because it was a help desk, or user because we were dealing with user support, or help. So I was looking at multiple options. One of the options we also considered was Citrus Desk because that was available. But then I really liked this name called Freshdesk, and I went online and I saw that somebody had actually booked the domain and they were holding it for 6 years. But I also noticed that this domain was going to expire in a month. so I was just hoping that if they don't renew, which was very highly unlikely, that I would actually try to back order it. So I actually back ordered the domain and waited. I think for whatever reason, the person did not renew. The person who was holding it for 6 years did not renew. And then there was a 1 month of waiting period or grace time that GoDaddy was actually giving that person to see if they are going to renew it. And it turns out that person also did not want to renew even after the 1 month of grace period with all the reminder emails that GoDaddy had sent. So then it was moved into auctions. So then I had to bid, like I think I bid like $20 or something, and I was just waiting to see if somebody else is going to like bid on this. And I think as they say, if you're destined to win, the universe conspires to make it happen. So I think at least in the case of the domain name, like nobody else was bidding for what I think is a great name in Freshdesk. So we got it after a month, and that's how we are today. That's how we got the domain freshdesk.com. Okay, so before talking about the current logo, I'll also tell you the previous story that because it was Freshdesk, we wanted something fresh. So we actually picked an image of an orange with 2 leaves. So that used to be our logo. I don't know if you have seen that logo. We had it for close to a year and a half or 2. But it so happened that there was another company in Germany, from where you come from. So they had a similar logo, which was an orange with 3 leaves. And they were not in our domain. They were not in customer support or help desk. They were some other services company offering knowledge management services and stuff like that. But somehow they took objection. They had obtained a trademark in Germany, but we were using it for longer than they were. But they obtained a restraining order in a court in Stuttgart, and we were sent a notice asking us to come and fight out the case in Germany. So, and as a startup, obviously we didn't have the resources or the time to go and fight a legal case for a logo in Germany. So I thought, anyway, if we are going to build multiple things, we wanted to change the logo. So we thought, we put one of our creative designers at that time to design a new logo. So what we have right now is the shape of a dewdrop. So the dewdrop is actually abstracting the concept of fresh. So, and then you can also see that inside the dewdrop there will be like light rays passing from the sun. So that causes that's the effect on the logo, if you have seen that. So I think it's a pretty cool logo, and it was also very extensible for us because we could put an icon inside the dewdrop. For Freshdesk we have a headset which denotes customer support. For Freshservice we have some other icon which denotes like IT heroes. So and as we move on for other products like chat or Freshphone, we'll probably have other icons. So the fresh part of the company is depicted by the dewdrop, and then the product is actually captured by the logo inside the dewdrop. So okay, when we started the company, we did not even think that we were VC fundable. So let me put it that way. So we in fact chose to build a help desk because that's something that I know, where we can actually build a product and start charging money from customers from day one. Unlike many businesses which probably worry about monetization later, monetization for us was a day one priority. So because we didn't have a lot of money. So we bootstrapped with my savings, whatever I had earned over 10 years of working. So we took that savings. The understanding between me and my co-founder was, okay, we have probably an 18 to 24 month runway to have a small team and try out working. And also our initial team members took big pay cuts. Most of them were earning like 30 to 40% of what they made before joining Freshdesk. So it was, and me and my co-founder weren't taking any salaries at all. So we thought, okay, our total burn was like $5,000 USD per month, including everything. So we thought, okay, let's try and run for some time, and if it doesn't work out, we'll probably lose some money, but it's okay, we'll go back. And I think that's probably the biggest advice I would give any entrepreneur is, if you try and fail, if the worst thing that happens to you is you lose some money, I don't think it's such a bad thing because you gain a lot of experience. It's our worry of whether we'd be able to get back to work and what will others around us in society think. I think these are some of the social stigmas that prevent people from getting into entrepreneurship. But I think what happened to us was we were also able to raise like 50K from two of my friends, and we won the Microsoft BizSpark Award, which is $40,000 free money. And by this time we had spent all the money on marketing, so we got some customers. And then I think Accel Partners, there was a lot of inbound interest, which I realize is in hindsight is the best way to raise funds. So when Accel Partners was talking to us, they told us that we had demonstrated that by releasing the product and having customers from different countries, we had shown them that there was product market fit and there was only execution risk. So they were willing to take the bet on somebody like me that we can scale the business and execute well. Okay, so I think this is a fantastic question because I've been observing Freshdesk as a company. So it's very much like a living organism, right? You see it grow from small to where it is today. So one of the first things I would say in structure is, as a startup, when you probably start, if you are like less than 10 people, each person is doing multiple things, right? So one person wearing multiple hats is a very, very chaotic way of doing things, but it's very enjoyable because everybody has ownership and you're doing a lot more than you can handle. And people who like working hard will really, really thrive in that environment. And as you scale to say between say 20 to 120 or 150 employees, or say 20 to 100 is the size where you're starting to build teams. Like your one person marketing team is not going to be enough anymore. Like maybe you'll have 3-4 people in marketing, maybe you'll have it's time for one person to think about PR and so on. So it's still pretty interesting because in our case there are lots of freshers, and like our senior members were leading those teams, teaching everything that they could. And at one point, I think, I don't remember the exact count, but there will come a stage in every startup, which I think is very, very important to recognize, that there will come a stage where the company needs to move from generalist to specialist. So which means if you had one marketing person who was doing like pretty much everything from PR to content writing to blog post to talking to customers, etc., there may be a time to kind of separate product marketing and marketing. There may be a time to have a separate PR division. So the interesting thing is, some of your core team members will actually be able to scale once they realize that this transition is happening. They will be able to recruit more people, build teams and scale to lead those teams. While some of your team members may not be able to scale. They may actually hate it. They may not like the fact that there are so many people coming in and productivity is starting to slightly decrease when you compare it to one person doing so many things. It feels like things are starting to move slow, but again, you have to realize that if you cannot build the company with just one person, right? So, and at those points, there are some critical decisions to take. Like for example, you may have to bring in somebody above your existing team member who is probably aspiring to that role but is not yet able to scale. Sometimes those people will leave and you have to be okay with that. So that's a big challenge, but it is inevitable. As the company scales, you need to kind of realize that the people whom you started with may not be the best people who are going to be able to lead you to the future. Okay. So see, I think every entrepreneur should know, or at least if you go back and see every company, the initial core team usually comes from an existing network. So this network can be the university where you studied, or the college where you studied, or the company where you worked, or the city where you lived in. So basically what I'm saying is the early employees of the company do not join the company, they join the CEO or the entrepreneur based on the personal relationship that they have and based on the belief that they have in the story. So I think for us, I had spent 10 years working in Chennai with the same company. There were many people who had worked with me. I built great relationship with these people. So many of these people are people who had worked with me earlier, who went to other companies. But when they knew that I had started Freshdesk, they came back, and probably because I had a good working relationship with them, and I would like to think that they liked working with me, so they wanted to come again and work for us. So I think I've been fortunate in that aspect to be able to kind of attract good talent. See, I think the number one thing that you should look for is passion, is culture fit, right? And basically, it doesn't matter if the person who's coming from outside has a great resume, has great track record. If you don't go into the meeting, when you go into a meeting like an interview or whatever, and when you come out, if you don't have a nice warm feeling that, okay, this is somebody I'm excited to work with, I would never hire that person. So I think you simply know, once you have done so many interviews, you actually know whether you like somebody or you don't like somebody. Can you picture them sitting with you, working with them on a day-to-day basis? So I think that's the most important thing that I would say. And obviously, you would have to hire smarter people than yourself. I think that's a no-brainer. Meaning, even though it's easy to say, I think a lot of people make the mistake of hiring people who they think will listen to what they're saying versus hiring people who are smarter than themselves. So definitely look at what we do here at Freshdesk is we look at what are the core talents that are required by a person or skill sets that are required by a person for that job which we are hiring. So which means, and I've said this often, like if we are hiring for customer support, we, more than looking for degrees, we look at basic strengths of the person, whether they have empathy, whether they have detail orientation, can they listen to the customer, are they able to adjust the way they speak based on their understanding of their listening. So these are things that we like to look for. Similarly, if it's a salesperson, are they a natural talker? Like, can they make you feel good after a conversation? So when we hire for people, the most important thing that we look for is culture fit. The second thing is, like, does the person impress us? Like, basically what I'm saying is, are we hiring people who are smarter than us? And third, we look at ensuring that the person has the core talent that's necessary for this role. Okay, so let me first talk about culture at Freshdesk, and so I'll start by telling you that in December last year, there was an interview where a journalist asked me, okay, so what are your biggest challenges for 2015? And that question got me thinking, because I was seriously thinking about what are my challenges. And to be honest, I was not really worried about our ability to build and ship product, or whether we'd be able to scale revenues, or whether we can market our products well, support our customers well. So I think pretty much everything seemed to be like under control. And as somebody who is always called me paranoid, but I was thinking that cannot be, there has to be something that's really challenging. And then it hit me, right? So I understood that as a company where we are adding like 20, 30 new people every month, and all these people coming from different backgrounds, so scaling our culture was going to be the biggest challenge for us. And the moment I realized that, in the first week of January, I actually sat down and wrote our culture deck, basically not fiction, but thinking about the people that we respect in the company, the kinds of behavior that we want to encourage, and the kinds of behavior we don't want people to adopt. So we kind of sat down and documented the culture code. And as a person, I hate doing the same thing again and again, but this culture deck, in the month of January alone, I presented to 8 teams. I did the presentation 8 times to make sure that all the people who had joined the company had actually gone through the culture deck, and then I did it for the managers, and then I did it for the sales teams and support teams. So I would tell you that at our stage, we realized that scaling culture was going to be the number one important thing for the company. And let me just talk about what is our culture. So we also tried to distill our culture into one sentence. So which is, we want Freshdesk to be a happy workplace for employees. And when I say happy workplace, I want to emphasize work and not the happy, right? So basically what I mean by that is the work that employees are doing has to give them satisfaction and happiness. So that's what we mean by happy workplace, and not just the foosball tables or the TT and the gym and all the facilities. So and then we worked backwards to kind of see how we can make that happen. So it started with hiring, right? So we hire passionate people who are self-starters. We don't believe that it's our job to make anybody work. So we don't have managers, project managers in Freshdesk who will just go around managing people. So our goal is to find people who are passionate, who are inspired by what we are doing, and who would like to join us in this journey of creating something meaningful. So which means our hiring looks for passion, our hiring looks for core talent fit, because we believe that if you are playing to your natural strengths, then work becomes play. You don't have to be managed and monitored. So then we thought about, okay, what are the other things that could actually cause unhappiness, right? Or when does work really create happiness? So we understood that, okay, like I think these are all things that I've learned over the years. So learning by doing actually gave us a lot of happiness. So we actually encourage learning by doing, because there is a good sense of accomplishment for people when they make mistakes, when they learn, and when the environment actually supports that. So we don't have any classroom trainings and so on. So we actually let people, we tell them what, we let them figure out the how, and we let them try and do it on their own, because we understand that that is how somebody gets joy at work. If somebody breaks down all the tasks and gives you like, go and do this today, in the next 4 hours you finish this, then that squeezes out any amount of creativity or joy that's left in the job. So like I can go on and on, but I just want to stop here to say, like, we've made sure identifying all the different aspects of what makes somebody really enjoy their work, and that's what we are striving to create at Freshdesk. So, and to answer your question, I can totally empathize with your question that in an early stage startup, when, like, let's say you are 5 people or 10 people, is culture really important? I don't think an early stage startup really needs to worry about defining culture or documenting culture or talking about culture. But I think what happens really is the CEO is the person who's defining the culture. So I think if you fundamentally believe what your natural strengths are, and the way you talk and the way you act, and people are observing that, and that sets the culture. Like, for example, if a customer is unhappy, right, and requests a refund, now does the CEO turn rude and reply to the customer in an arrogant fashion, or is the CEO humble, and are they actually apologizing to the customer and setting the right example? Or if let's say an employee is being fired, right, does the CEO respect the individual as a person, explains to them why the relationship can't continue, focus on respecting people but still letting them go, versus acting as if you're the boss and just say you're fired, right? So all these actions of the CEO actually define the culture of the company in a later stage, because people actually observe and act. So I would say probably the first time I failed was when I started my second company, I should say, in 2001. When I came back from the US, before joining AdventNet, I started a training company. So in 2001, after the dot-com bust, there was a lot of negativity in the market. I didn't listen to anybody, and I actually came and started a training company. And what I realized at that point of time was how hard it was to actually sell the need. Like in 1990, to give you context, in 1999 I had a training company, which was I wouldn't even call it a company, it was me working on the side. So basically training people, my friends on Java, and everybody wanted to learn Java in those days. So it was much easier for me to sell, why learn from me. In 2001, when the market was confused, I had to tell the market that Java is still relevant, tell the prospective students. So the biggest lesson for me was like what I call riding the wave. So riding the wave is much easier than going against it, right? So which is why when the SaaS adoption happened, that I would call as another wave that's happening right now in software. So I thought riding this wave would probably be an opportunity to build a company as opposed to riding against it. So I would say that is one of my top lessons. So there are many lessons that I can go on. One, I don't necessarily know if it was a failure in entrepreneurship, but it was a failure in relationships. So basically, I used to be really abrasive with people. In fact, I didn't even know the term. I thought there were people who are aggressive and there are people who are submissive. It was my boss, my previous boss, who taught me that, Girish, you are being abrasive with people. So he told me that if you're aggressive in the market and you're winning customers, that's good, but don't be abrasive with people, because once you destroy the fabric of the relationship, it's very tough to rebuild. That was a fundamental lesson which actually stuck with me over the years, and this happened sometime in 2003 or 4, where I kind of was able to see how the way I talked to people actually was damaging the relationship that I had with them. So I corrected it, and I think I'm really thankful to my mentor for giving me that lesson. And from that day on, I started placing a lot more emphasis on relationships, on making sure that I treat people with respect and say things, don't say things that will cause hurt or harm. Okay, so I think the biggest incident I can think of happened in December 2011, when when a noted industry analyst, Ben Keeps, actually called us Freshdesk as a rip-off of Zendesk, and the reason for that was we had desk in the name. So Freshdesk also has desk and Zendesk also has desk. Now, to the casual observer, it seems like this is somebody, an industry analyst, talking, sharing his opinion that Freshdesk is an imitator of or a rip-off of Zendesk. But the timing was quite interesting. So on December 1st, we had announced our funding from Accel Partners of $1 million. And on December 2nd, out of the blue, somebody starts attacking us, right? So probably what, and the person, I knew this person was actually a blogger because I had worked with him, not directly, but our company Zoho had worked with him previously. So I actually replied to him on Twitter saying, as a respected industry journalist or analyst, it would have been, you have not even tried Freshdesk, so why do you call us a rip-off of Zendesk? And you could have actually done an objective review and comparing the both products. Now, again, one of the advantages in SaaS is that now he has not even signed up for Freshdesk, and I know that because I have access to the database. So now he didn't know what to say, so immediately he called Mikhail Swain, the CEO of Zendesk, for support. And then Mikhail comes and says this famous statement or tweet which says, you know what they say, imitation is the sincerest form of wait, what a freaking ripoff. Now, it was pretty insulting or pretty negative for us, and all of our employees at that time were pretty angry and they wanted to react immediately, but I had to hold them back. So I thought, let's understand what is happening and why is somebody attacking us out of the blue, and let's not fight it out on Twitter. Let's understand before we respond. So I had to hold them back, and I think that is, in hindsight, really a good decision, because it turned out to be the best PR that we've ever done. What we did was we replied back with a website called ripoffornot.org, where we actually identified that the person who had attacked us was in fact a paid blogger of Zendesk. So basically they were trying to spread bad name because they thought they were small fish who would go away, but when we got the Accel funding, probably they wanted to smear some mud on our campaign, and it boomeranged on them. And there was also lots of other sides and twists in the story, but I would encourage you to go and read ripofffornot.org, which is our response to a tweet which turned out to be the best PR that ever happened to the company. See, I'm a fundamental believer in you can't put in what God intentionally left out. So basically, an entrepreneur should be who they really are. First thing is, don't try to be someone whom you're not. Look for, but so when you said character traits, that's what I meant. But again, my belief is I've seen successful entrepreneurs. One common thing that I've seen is they're all really passionate and they believe deeply in what they're doing, even when the whole world tells them it cannot be done. So that conviction of being foolish when everybody around you who are all smart people tell you that it won't work. Then I think another important trait should be the ability to attract talent. That's I don't know if statistics prove otherwise, but the successful entrepreneurs that I have seen are people who can tell a good story and then attract people to come and work for them. So I think these are some things that I've observed, but my advice would be to be who you naturally are, be genuine and honest to people, be passionate about what you're doing, and tell a great story. So one of the things that we see is going to really become mainstream is the social support. So more and more companies are realizing that they can't just take customers for granted. Today, I would say customers have realized that they have got social power. It's a term that I coined. So basically, once you know that you can take on the company and get what you want, customers are not going back to the traditional channels of phone and email and waiting. So they're demanding and getting the support that they deserve. So this phenomenon has started pushing more and more companies to take care of their customers, because it's no longer a customer support problem. It's now a marketing problem impacting your brand if you don't do the right thing for the customer. That is one. The second is obviously the shift to mobile, which like we saw in India, companies like Myntra and Flipkart is also saying that they're going to abandon the desktop and going to mobile, right? So what happens to customer support then? If all your users are coming from mobile, why do you expect your customers to go to the website, find a phone number or email address, and then send a support ticket? So we think, and we are ready with our product called MobiHelp, where we enable mobile apps to embed a support SDK into their app supplied by Freshdesk. So basically, a user of the app can hit the feedback widget or a feedback button or a support button and actually request support from within the app, and the company can actually respond from Freshdesk to have a real-time conversation with the app user inside the app. So these are all like at least a couple of things that I think are defining the future of where we are going, where our industry is going. Third point I would like to say is peer-to-peer communication. We all know that customers want to talk to other customers. So we had traditionally assumed that these conversations happen on forums where users group together and talk. Now this will also move into the mobile, where let's say you have purchased, you want to purchase a product on let's say Amazon, but you don't want to read all the reviews. You just want to quickly ask a question, like let's say, will this work in India? So you push a question on your mobile. Like Amazon can route it to other users who have bought it and using it in India. Now, if I am one such user, I can just say, hey, I use it in India, it works well. And boom, immediately you get an answer to your question, you're ready to purchase. So peer-to-peer communication, when people don't know each other, helping each other in terms of buying decisions, in terms of answering questions about products. So I think these are trends that we are predicting will move to the mobile and real-time conversation. So the first thing you have to understand is, are you selling to the CEO, or are you selling to the manager, or are you building a product for the engineers? So at Freshdesk, we build product mostly for the engineers. So which means that somebody who comes online and signs up for Freshdesk, probably in the next 10-15 minutes, they have to like the product. They have to be able to think and feel that, oh, this looks good, this seems easy to set up, I feel comfortable navigating this product, and it looks like I can set it up on my own. Now that is the guiding principle for us. So whatever we do, we want to ensure that we don't take that ease of use or intuitiveness away from the product, because the day we make it complex and non-intuitive is the day we start losing. So whatever we want to build, we try to make sure that it's really, really easy for the user to understand. So we put a lot of emphasis on UX, on the language that we use for the features, in terms of making it really dead simple for somebody to understand. So there are many other things that I could say. Like, for example, a common mistake that early stage entrepreneurs would do is, there would be some big customer who would say, if you build this feature for me, like I would buy like 100 licenses from you, right? So the yardstick for a product manager should always be, does this make sense for the market, or is it just a feature for one customer? If it's a feature for just one customer, we would never build it. Even if that means we say no and we lose the customer, so be it, because we are not in the business of custom product development. We are in the business of building a product that can probably get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. I think it's a great leveler of the playing field. So I think I know a lot of cases where people who can't afford to get into an Ivy League school have benefited massively with things like Khan Academy or all these open online courses. If you're able to, if you are seeking knowledge, then good content and good education is available online. So in fact, I would say that as an entrepreneur, most of my early day knowledge came from Hacker News and venture hacks about VC funding and so on. So I'm a big believer in online education. So I think it's fundamentally a great leveler, because it allows you to study from the convenience of your home, or at the time that you want. And actually, if the knowledge is all that matters, you don't have to be really going to a particular college or university in order to acquire that knowledge.